most memorable things for people coming off the aircraft after a tour of the Panama Canal. Gosh, I've done them for over 10 years. So one of the things that I think is most striking is probably the scope of the project, both the original and, to a lesser extent, the new locks. The expansion, as it was called, or is called. You don't get a sense of just how big a project it was back in 1904, going back further to the French construction, the original French construction. It was a 10-year project for the U.S. from 1904 to 1914. And I've had passengers, a variety of passengers from all over the world, a Russian billionaire with his ex-wife and his daughter and his mistress or girlfriend. That was interesting. Governors of U.S. states, billionaires, millionaires, thousandaires, people on taking a bucket list, people from cruise ships. But they remark about, that's probably the thing that hits them the most, is just how big it is. And you don't get that sense from Google Earth or the ground. So going up in the air, you see what it means when I say Gatun Lake is the size of metropolitan Detroit, for instance. At one point, it was the largest man-made lake in the world. And with the expansion, I think it may have reclaimed that crown. So, yes, the scope. And when you add in the little factoids about the construction, the original construction, for instance, the amount of dirt that's been taken out, that was taken out for the original construction, would have filled a train that would go around the earth 3.5 times. That's an awful lot of dirt. They usually will ask, where'd all the dirt go? And I said, well, I'll show you when it didn't just go off to the side. You don't do that. You can't do that. Otherwise, it would just come back in. The weight would just refill the land over time. So it went out into the Caribbean or into the Pacific side. The Amador Causeway was built from landfill from the canal construction. So those things are give them perspective, and they realize, my goodness, that was amazing. And the other thing that hits them is, at that point, wait a minute, they did this all with slide rules and pencil and paper. There were no computers really back then. There were some calculating machines, rudimentary, but it was slide rules and paper, and that's what they had to, and human ingenuity. And there's the bridge at Gamboa that crosses we call it the Gamboa Bridge. It crosses the Chagres River, which is one of the main water feeds filling the canal. I've driven over this bridge, I don't know, hundreds of times. And it was always a little strange to me. There was something about it. And this is the bridge where you have, it's actually a little scary when you go across it the first time. You think, oh no, wait. And then you see a Panama Canal train, Panama Canal railway train going over it, and you think, okay, fine. But it is a structure that was built in the original construction of the canal. And what's odd about it is, you go over it a few times, you realize this bridge is curved. What on earth is going on here? And you think, why on earth is this bridge go? Most bridges are straight. There's no obvious reason why the bridge is curved. It's not that long. Why is this thing curved? When you get up in the air, then you see it. And I tell people in advance, oh yeah, keep an eye out for the Gamboa Bridge. We're going to fly across it. Or we're going to fly next to it. And then they see it and they go, and I say, do you notice the bridge is curved? And they'll go, yeah, why is that? I said, well, back during the original construction, when they made this bridge, they made it curved so it could be a dam to block off the Chagres River. So what they could do back then is put steel plates on the curve is like this. I don't know the perspective with the camera, but it's curved like this. The water's coming in, it's curved. And structurally, from an engineering standpoint, all dams have a curve to them, basically, because they're stronger that way. Oh, good dams. Hoover Dam is curved, for instance. So you find the human ingenuity that they realize we may have to slow or cut off the Chagres River from overwhelming the canal in some way, shape, or form. Or they may need to do maintenance. But they had the ingenuity to say, we better make this bridge curved. That is pretty memorable. That hits home the fact that these are incredibly brilliant engineers, minds working on the canal back then. Another little factoid about the ingenuity of the people who constructed the locks and the canal in general. Each lock has a control center, the old locks. And Miraflores is the most famous. It's a big white structure in the middle of the locks, in between the two locks. Inside that structure is a table. And it was the controls for the locks themselves. In other words, you would open a valve to let water in from the lake in to fill because it's all gravity fed. There's no pumps involved in this. It's simply gravity forcing water from the upper level of the lake level, which is about 83 feet above sea level. And it goes down like stair steps. Well, in those tables, underneath the tables, is a complex mechanism, far more complex. It may even have been the most complex mechanism ever made at that point. It will, as you turn a valve, it won't allow you to turn the valve unless the locks are in the proper position, closed or open. And you can't open the gates unless the water level is at the correct position between them. So you don't have a spill, a massive accident. There are mechanisms that prevent them from being turned, which in turn prevents problems. Really brilliant stuff. So all three of those structures have those mechanisms in place. They're no longer used, they're done by computers now. And that reinforces the point that, yeah, these are really smart people, really smart people. As you fly up towards Cologne, you go by Barrow, Colorado, and that's where the Smithsonian has their research facility. And I tell people, okay, all the islands that you're going to see now were once hilltops. More perspective. Then they see Lago Gatun and they realize, boy, this thing's huge. As you get closer to the Caribbean side, the Gatun locks, you also see Gatun Dam, which if you're going towards that, going really northwest direction, you see Gatun Dam, you see the locks, and then you see Cologne and France Field or the free zone in front of you. Well, Gatun Dam was at one point in time, it was the largest earthen dam ever built. Now it's been superseded by, I think, a dam in China, memory serves. But here's where they tend to get, especially Panamanians, get a little, what? Surprise. During the Vietnam War, 1968, Panama had a huge drought. The Canal Authority they were in kind of uncharted territory here because the amount of shipping going through, traffic going through, because of the Vietnam War, let alone commercial traffic, had been increasing over the years, though nowhere near where it is now. The canal was thinking, we're going to run out of water. We may not have enough water to be able to do all the transits we need to do for the U.S. military and commercial traffic. So keep in mind that the canal is hydro-powered, both hydroelectric and, as I said, gravity. There's no pumps for the locks. But hydroelectric powers the locomotives that help guide the ships through the locks, and the lights and navigation, and in general power the canal. So they had this problem, and they called up the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they said, hey, can you send down the Sturgis? The Sturgis was an old World War II Liberty ship that in the early 60s had been converted to a nuclear reactor, power plant, power station. Essentially, they cut a big chunk of the middle section out of the ship and replaced it with a nuclear power plant. And because they took the ship's engines out, it became a barge. So they towed the thing down and they put it in between Gatun Dam and the locks. And it sat there for 8 years providing power to the canal and also to Panama City. So Panama City was nuclear powered for a while, and Panamanians tend to, their eyes go wide and go, what? There's another story about Jimmy Buffett being an electrician's mate on the Sturgis, which is not true. And I did find out the real story behind it. Too long for here, but it is a good story. Maybe I'll do that sometime. Again, this is all part of the how the canal developed over time. And the Sturgis was a good example of human ingenuity. How do we overcome this issue? Another thing that strikes people is the color of the water in the canal. Parts of it are clearer than the other, and especially in the middle, in the cut especially, the Gaillard Cut. And what people don't realize is the canal really they've never stopped constructing the canal. Okay, it's maintenance, but the dredging of the canal has never stopped other than for maybe 6 or 8 months. And that's it. It's the constant dredging going on. And that's because the earth comes in, the sediment flows in from Chagres and from other parts, just runoff into the canal. So they have to dredge it. They have to keep dredging. It's an ongoing process and will continue. There's no way to stop it. So they don't realize what an awesome job it is just to maintain the old locks and the canal. Then they get to the new expansion, and probably the most memorable part of the expansion was during construction, when we would go over a specific spot at Gatun Dam, or Gatun Locks. And they're kind of surprised that the U.S. had been planning on expanding the locks, the canal, to allow bigger size ships back in the 20s and 30s. In fact, they started to dredge a new channel to the east of Gatun Locks. And you could see it on Google Earth. And for a while during construction, they had gotten to the point where from the perspective of the Caribbean side, they were going towards the lake. And there was a wall. And that was like a plug. And that's where the new locks are right now, the new construction. And that plug was the only thing that kept the water from running out of Gatun Lake. So they monitored that like there was no tomorrow. There were seismic monitors in there. There were lasers. There was all sorts of monitoring equipment. Because had that thing, for some reason, had there been an earthquake and that plug had been damaged, and it doesn't take very much, you don't realize that it doesn't. You don't need a big breach. All you need is a very small breach. Just as long as the water starts flowing, it's going to cut its way through very quickly, and the lake would drain, and that would be it. For about 3 years, it would take about 3 years to refill the canal. Had that happen, it would have been catastrophic for world trade. And if you saw what happened to Evergreen, Evergreen ship, whatever it was, in the Suez Canal recently, you have an idea of what that would be like for 3 years. And that's another point that people are taken with is the economic impact of the canal. If the canal was a totally private corporation, you ought to think of it as like IBM. It's huge. Almost 15% of the U.S. economy is impacted by what goes through the canal. So just imagine what would happen over 3 years. It was an enormous impact that the canal has on the American economy, let alone the global economy. So those are the things that I think are the most memorable. I get the most questions on them. That's probably why I know them the most. They want me to say it again after they get off. And we go to a map, like a big map. That's usually what happens. I go into a VIP room at one of the hangars, and there's a map, and they'll point to things. And those are the things they tend to find the most memorable about their Panama Canal tour.